Hello everyone, welcome to World History Explored. Today we are delving into the rich history of Paleo-Indians. First inhabited what is now known as Nicaragua as far back as 12,000 BCE. In later pre-Columbian times, Nicaragua's indigenous people were part of the intermediate area between the Mesoamerican and Andean cultural regions and within the influence of the Istmo-Colombian area. Nicaragua's central region and its Caribbean coast were inhabited by Macro-Chibchan language ethnic groups such as the Miskito, Rama, Mayana, and Matagalpas. They had coalesced in Central America and migrated both to and from present-day northern Colombia and nearby areas. Their food came primarily from hunting and gathering, but also fishing and slash-and-burn agriculture. Before we go on, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Let's get started. Nicaragua is a nation in Central America. It is located about midway between Mexico and Colombia, bordered by Honduras to the north and Costa Rica to the south. Nicaragua ranges from the Caribbean Sea on the nation's east coast and the Pacific Ocean border in the west. Nicaragua also possesses a series of islands and cays located in the Caribbean Sea. Nicaragua's name is derived from Nicarao, the name of the Nahuatl-speaking tribe which inhabited the shores of Lake Nicaragua before the Spanish conquest of the Americas, and the Spanish word agua means water, due to the presence of the large Lake Casabolca or Lake Nicaragua, and Lake Managua or Lake Salotlan, as well as lagoons and rivers in the region. Nicaragua was first encountered by Europeans when Christopher Columbus made his way south from what is today Honduras, exploring the eastern coast of America on his fourth voyage in 1502. The first time the Europeans incur into the limits of what is today Nicaragua occurs September 14, 1502. In 1522, the first Spaniards entered the region of what would become known as Nicaragua. Gil Gonzalez de Villa with a small force reached its western portion after a trek through Costa Rica. Cordoba apparently came with the intention of colonization. In 1524, he established permanent settlements in the region, including two of Nicaragua's principal towns, Granada on Lake Nicaragua and Leon west of Lake Managua. By 1529, the conquest of Nicaragua was complete. Several conquistadors came out winners, and some were executed or murdered. From colony to state. In 1538, the Viceroyalty of New Spain was established, encompassing all of Mexico and Central America, except Panama. By 1570, the southern part of New Spain was designated the Captaincy General of Guatemala. The area of Nicaragua was divided into administrative parties with Leon as the capital. In 1610, the volcano known as Momotombo erupted, destroying the capital. The region was subject to frequent raids by Dutch, French, and British pirates, with the city of Granada being invaded twice in 1658 and 1660. Fight for independence. Nicaraguans were divided over Spanish monarchy and independence. In 1811, Nicolas Garcia Jerez, a priest, decided to make concessions with pro-independence figures. The citizens of Leon were the first to act against the Spanish monarchy. They overthrew the local intendant Jose Salvador on December 13, 1811. The Spanish Constitution of 1812 granted more independence to local administrations, and Garcia Perez was appointed as the intendant of Nicaragua. In 1821, Guatemala declared its independence, and all Central American provinces followed it. Nicaragua became a part of the First Mexican Empire in 1822, was a part of the United Provinces of Central America in 1823, and then became an independent republic in its own right in 1838. The Mosquito Coast, based on blue fields on the Atlantic, was claimed by the United Kingdom as a protectorate from 1655 to 1850. This area was designated to Honduras in 1859 and transferred to Nicaragua in 1860, though it remained autonomous until 1894. The rivalry often degenerated into civil war, particularly during the 1840s and 1850s. Initially invited by the Liberals in 1855 to join their struggle against the Conservatives, a United States adventurer named William Walker declared himself president in 1856 and made English the official language. Honduras and other Central American countries united to drive him out of Nicaragua in 1857, after which a period of 3 decades of conservative rule ensued. They were supported by the United States industrialist Cornelius Vanderbilt, who had originally sponsored Walker in Nicaragua. Walker was executed in neighboring Honduras on September 12, 1860. Taking advantage of divisions within the conservative ranks, Jose Santos Zelaya led a liberal revolt that brought him to power in 1893. Zelaya ended the long-standing dispute with the United Kingdom over the Atlantic coast in 1894 and reincorporated the Mosquito Coast into Nicaragua. U.S. interventions. Because of the strategic importance of Nicaragua in the hemisphere of the United States, U.S. made numerous military interventions to protect what it believed were its interests in the region. 1894, month-long occupation of Bluefields, 1896. Marines land in port of Corinto, 1898. Marines land at port of San Juan del Sur, 1899. Marines land at port of Bluefields, 1907. Dollar diplomacy protectorate set up, 1910. Marines land in Bluefields and Corinto, 1912 to 33. Bombing 20-year occupation, fought guerrillas, 1981 to 90. CIA directs exile, Contra, revolution, plans harbor mines against government. United States occupation, 1909 to 1933. In 1909, the United States provided political support to conservative-led forces rebelling against President Zelaya. U.S. motives included differences over the proposed Nicaragua Canal, Nicaragua's potential as a destabilizing influence in the region, and Zelaya's attempts to regulate foreign access to Nicaraguan natural resources. On November 17, 1909, 2 Americans were executed by order of Zelaya after the 2 men confessed to having laid a mine in the San Juan River with the intention of blowing up the diamond. In August 1912, the president of Nicaragua, Adolfo Diaz, requested the resignation of the Secretary of War, General Luis Mina. United States Marines were stationed in Nicaragua from 1912 to 1933, except for a 9-month period beginning in 1925. From 1910 to 1926, the Conservative Party ruled Nicaragua. The Chamorro family, which had long dominated the party, effectively controlled the government during that period. In 1914, the Bryan Chamorro Treaty was signed, giving the U.S. control of the proposed canal, as well as leases for potential canal defenses. Nicaraguan Civil War, 1926 to 1927. Following the evacuation of U.S. immigrants in 1925, another violent conflict between liberals and conservatives, known as the Constitutionalist War, took place in 1926 when liberal soldiers in the Caribbean port of Puerto Cabezas revolted against conservative President Adolfo Diaz, recently installed as a result of United States pressure following a coup. On May 4, 1927, representatives from the 2 warring factions signed the Pact of Espino Negro, negotiated by Henry Stimson, appointed by U.S. President Calvin Coolidge as a special envoy to Nicaragua. 1927 to 1933, the only Nicaraguan general to refuse to sign this pact, El Tratado del Espino Negro, was Augusto Cesar Sandino. He took refuge in the northern mountains of Las Segovias. When the Americans left in 1933 as a result of Sandino's guerrilla war and the Great Depression, they set up the National Guard, a combined military and police force trained and equipped by the Americans, designed to be loyal to U.S. interests. Fearing future armed opposition from Sandino, Somoza invited him to a meeting in Managua, where Sandino was assassinated on February 21 of 1934 by the National Guard. Anastasio Somoza Garcia's rule, with Sandino's death and using his troops, the National Guard, to force Sacasa to resign, Somoza had taken control of the country in 1937 and destroyed any potential armed resistance. The Somoza family would rule until 1979. On September 21, 1956, a Nicaraguan poet, Rigoberto Lopez Perez, snuck into a party attended by the president and shot him in the chest. Somoza's rise to power and the formation of a dictatorship. Divisions within the Conservative Party in the 1932 elections paved the way for the liberal Juan Bautista Sacasa to assume power. President Sacasa's popularity decreased as a result of his poor leadership and accusations of fraud in the 1934 congressional elections. Somoza Garcia benefited from Sacasa's diminishing power and at the same time brought together the National Guard and the Liberal Party, Partido Liberal PL, in order to win the presidential elections in 1936. Early in 1936, Somoza openly confronted President Sacasa by using military force to displace local government officials loyal to the president and replacing them with close associates. Somoza Garcia's increasing military confrontation led to Sacasa's resignation on June 6, 1936. On January 1, 1937, he resumed control of the National Guard, combining the roles of president and chief director of the military. After Somoza's win in the December 1936 presidential elections, he proceeded to consolidate his power within the National Guard, while at the same time dividing his political opponents. Thus, in 1938, Somoza Garcia named a constituent assembly that gave the president extensive power and elected him for another 8-year term. In 1941, during World War II, Nicaragua declared war on Germany. Younger Somoza Garcia was succeeded by his 2 sons. Luis Somoza Debayle became president 29 September 1956 to 1 May 1963 and was effectively dictator of the country until his death, but his brother Anastasio Somoza Debayle held great power as head of the National Guard. In 1961, a young student, Carlos Fonseca, evoked the historical figure of Sandino and founded the Sandinista National Liberation Front, XSLN. The XSLN was a tiny party throughout most of the 1960s, but Somoza's hatred of it and his repressive treatment of anyone suspected as a Sandinista sympathizer gave many ordinary Nicaraguans the idea that the Sandinistas were much stronger than was the case. In the 1950s, a synthetic brand of cotton, one of Nicaragua's economic pillars of the epoch, was developed. In 1968, the World Health Organization found that polluted water led to 17% of all Nicaraguan deaths. American economic involvement from 1945 to 1960, the U.S.-owned Nicaraguan Long Leaf Pine Company, NIPCO, directly paid the Somoza family millions of dollars in exchange for favorable benefits to the company, such as not having to reforest clear-cut areas. By 1961, NIPCO had cut all of the commercially viable coastal pines in northeast Nicaragua. Expansion of cotton plantations in the 1950s and cattle ranches in the 1960s forced peasant families from the areas they had farmed for decades. By the early 1970s, Nicaragua had become the United States' top beef supplier. Also in the 1950s and 1960s, 40% of all U.S. pesticide exports went to Central America. Nicaragua and its neighbors widely used compounds banned in the U.S., such as DDT, Endrin, Dieldrin, and Lindane. In 1977, a study revealed that mothers living in Leon had 45 times more DDT in their breast milk than the World Health Organization's safe level. Sandinista insurrection, 1972 to 1979. A major turning point was the December 1972 Managua earthquake that killed over 10,000 people and left 500,000 homeless. A great deal of international relief was sent to the nation. Somoza's brazen corruption, mishandling of relief, which prompted Pittsburgh Pirates star Roberto Clemente to fly to Managua on December 31, 1972, to try to help a flight that ended in his death, and refusal to rebuild Managua, flooded the ranks of the Sandinistas with young, disaffected Nicaraguans who no longer had anything to lose. The Sandinistas received some support from Cuba and the Soviet Union. On 27 December 1974, a group of 9 XSLN guerrillas invaded a party at the home of a former Minister of Agriculture, killing him and 3 guards in the process of taking several leading government officials and prominent businessmen hostage. Martial law was declared in 1975, and the National Guard began to raise villages in the jungle suspected of supporting the rebels. The country tipped into full-scale civil war with the 1978 murder of Pedro Chamorro, who had opposed violence against the regime. In May 1979, another general strike was called, and the SLN launched a major push to take control of the country. Sandinista period, 1979 to 1990. On July 19, 1979, a new government was proclaimed under a provisional junta headed by 33-year-old Daniel Ortega and included Violeta Chamorro, Pedro's widow. Somoza eventually ended up in Paraguay, where he was assassinated in September 1980, allegedly by members of the Argentinian Revolutionary Workers' Party. The key large-scale programs of the Sandinistas included a national literacy crusade from March to August 1980. Nicaragua received international recognition for gains in literacy, healthcare, education, childcare, unions, and land reform. The Sandinistas won the national election of November 4, 1984, gathering 67% of the vote. The election was certified as free and fair by the majority of international observers. In 1993, the Library of Congress wrote foreign observers generally reported that the election was fair. Communist leanings and U.S.-backed Contras. American support for the long rule of the Somoza family had soured relations, and the SLN government was committed to a Marxist ideology, with many of the leading Sandinista continuing long-standing relationships with the Soviet Union and Cuba. With the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980, relations between the United States and the Sandinista regime became an active front in the Cold War. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights investigated abuses by Sandinista forces, including an execution of 35 to 40 Miskitos in December 1981 and an execution of 75 people in November 1984. Daniel Ortega was elected president in 1984. The years of war in Nicaragua's economic situation had taken an unparalleled toll on Nicaragua. On May 1, 1985, Reagan issued an executive order that imposed a full economic embargo on Nicaragua, which remained in force until March 1990. Nicaragua won a historic case against the U.S. at the International Court of Justice in 1986, and the U.S. was ordered to pay Nicaragua $12 billion in reparations for violating Nicaraguan sovereignty by engaging in attacks against it. 16 years of center-right rule, 1990 to 2006. The SLN lost to the National Opposition Union by 14 points in elections on February 25, 1990. ABC News had been predicting a 16-point Sandinista victory. At the beginning of Violeta Chamorro's nearly 7 years in office, the Sandinistas still largely controlled the army, labor unions, and courts. In February 1995, Sandinista Popular Army Samber Gen. Humberto Ortega was replaced in accordance with a new military code enacted in 1994 by Gen. Joaquin Quadra, who espoused a policy of greater professionalism in the renamed Army of Nicaragua. A new police organization law passed by the National Assembly and signed into law in August 1996 further codified both civilian control of the police and the professionalization of that law enforcement agency. In November 2006, the presidential election was won by Daniel Ortega, returned to power after 16 years in opposition. International observers, including the Carter Center, judged the election to be free and fair. The country partly rebuilt its economy during the 1990s, but was hit hard by Hurricane Mitch at the end of October 1998, almost exactly a decade after the similarly destructive Hurricane Joan, and again in 2007 it was hit by Hurricane Felix, a Category 5 hurricane. Ortega back in power, 2006 present. In the Nicaraguan general election, 2006, Daniel Ortega gained some 38% of the vote in the single round, thus returning to power for his second term overall. That notwithstanding, Ortega ran again and won the Nicaraguan general election 2011 amid accusations of fraud by losing candidate Fabio Gaidia Mantilla. The Nicaraguan general election 2016 saw a partial electoral boycott by the opposition and again accusations of electoral fraud as well as accusations that the abstention rate was higher than the one officially published by the government. The Nicaraguan Canal was an issue of public debate and some controversy. Starting 19 April 2018, criticism of the Ortega government over the canal, forest fires in the Indio Maize Nature Reserve, and a planned reform of the social security system led to the 2018 to 2022 Nicaraguan protests, to which the government responded with violence and harsh repression. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.